Dear colleagues, I hope you all hear me. My name is Matthias Maucher, Policy Officer, EAPN Office. I'm sitting here together with Sean Jones, Policy Coordinator, and in another office in our meeting room, we have Stefan from the European Commission and Judith Tobac from our Belgian EAPN member, and also online the two other speakers, Paul Ginnell in Dublin and Richard Scharfenberg in Warsaw. So welcome, dear colleagues, dear members, to a webinar on how we can strengthen and make more effective our involvement, EAPN's involvement as a network, but also your involvement as national EAPN members in the European semester, how it can bear more fruits for you in national policy making. How can you better link to your government and the other policy makers, and how we work better in a network to bring the key messages to the European level, to the Commission, to the Parliament and others. So the idea of this webinar is, the first idea is that we try this new format, this online format, to have a mutual exchange and a learning exercise. Those that have more experience should share their lessons with others. But the other is that we obviously would like to show to you again, or to highlight that we have developed EAPN toolkit to engage in the European semester and the pillar of social rights that we will shortly present afterwards, Sean and myself. And we would like to collect feedback on this, because we want to update this document also for the 2020 round of the European semester. And obviously we would like to offer to you some updates on the timing of the annual growth survey, the joint employment report, and in general the European semester process. Also if there are any changes likely concerning the procedures or the content. To the extent you already know this, you know that the European Commission came in only yesterday, and we will come back to this later. So you are asked to basically use, for technical issues now, the audio function, not the video function, because it takes a lot of computing time and space that might hinder the swift communication. I have muted, or please mute if it's not yet the case, your microphones. And if you want later, after the presentations and in our exchange, in our discussion round at the end, if you want yourself to be heard, to be listened to, please use the function where you can raise the hand. I will see it. I am the coordinator. I hope I will not overlook you, and I will give you the floor. But if you unmute your mic, we will have a lot of problems with echoes here. So please mute your mic if you are not, or when you are not speaking. You can also use the chat function that you have if you want to communicate something to everybody, then it will be shown. You simply can select everybody and it will be shown to everybody. The webinar is being recorded, but only for internal purposes, because we want to see that later also those EAPN members that have no time now, are not available to listen and are still interested, can use it. So this is purely for internal use, and we hope that you can all agree with this. And we will also share on our internal web page on the members, in the members room, the presentations that will be shown today. So that's for the introduction. I hope I checked with you individually that you can all be on board, and that I could all listen to you when you came in. So that's a good sign. I just saw a mail coming in from Paula. I will quickly check it when I give the floor to Sean to start with. So the idea is, as you see, we start, this is the agenda that we all have received, that we start with an overview given by our policy coordinator. Then I will talk a little bit, to the extent we know it, on the annual growth survey, the employment report, the timelines there. But this is also perfect link then to the intervention by Stefan, who will give an update also on these issues, what he knows about the process, And obviously, we'll look into the question, how can NGOs, civil society organizations better engage in the European semester project, the different steps, the different reports. And then we invite 3 of our members that kindly volunteered to speak, to share their own experiences, their positive and negative points, how things can be improved, what they did to have an influence in the semester from Ireland, Belgium, and Poland. And at the end, we would have a more open exchange on these different points. I have the idea that after each presentation, I will ask if there are really urgent questions to this presentation, then please ask. Otherwise, please save your questions for the end. So, having said this, I see also the Czech colleagues are there. I will now unmute them, otherwise it's a problem. I would now give the floor to Shan and ask her to start with her presentation. I have to go through this. Please, again, all colleagues, mute your mics. Also, I will do it for Judith now and for Olga again. And we hope we will have a safe journey, technically and content-wise. So please, Shan, you have the floor, and I go to your presentation. And I will check a little bit with Paula in the meantime, but please start your presentation and lead us through your input into this webinar.
Okay, thanks very much. And hope that you can all hear me. It's a slightly strange experience for us to do this, so it's a learning experience, and hopefully we can improve it for the next round of webinars. So I'm going to basically take you through a bit of an introduction to the European semester, its basic processes, and a little bit of an assessment of how EAPN is engaged. Can you pass? Can you pass? Okay, so yes, so we'll just simply give you a little introduction about EAPN, the overview from the semester, how it delivers on Europe 2020 and the European Pillar of Social Rights, a little bit on EAPN engagement so far, and the assessment of the semester at the moment with our key demands for 2020. I would say that everything I'm saying is actually captured in the toolkit. So we'll be giving a lot of plugs for that, as this is what we hope people will be using really as a reference document to get all the information about how they should engage. So for those of you who are not involved with it, EAPN is the largest independent network of NGOs working on poverty across Europe, and we've been around since 1990 and have always been engaged in these EU processes, particularly now in the European semester, with the aim of trying to get progress on poverty. We get financial support from the Commission, and at the moment we now have 32 national networks and 13 European NGOs who are members. For us, the participation of people in poverty, directly experiencing poverty, is crucial, and it's also key to how we involve people in poverty actually in these civil society dialogue processes, particularly in the European semester. So, what is the European semester? Well, it's very clear that this is a big player. It's the main EU annual cycle of macroeconomic, budgetary, fiscal and thematic coordination. And it has a combination of functions. Its overarching function is macroeconomic and fiscal, but it does have this thematic coordination function. What does this mean? There are 2 parallel strands. First of all, we have this macroeconomic and fiscal surveillance, which is carried out through the Stability and Growth Pact. And then we have this thematic coordination, which is really focused on the Europe 2020 strategy, where we find the reference to poverty and the poverty target, and now the European Pillar of Social Rights. And through this process, the Commission sets common priorities with Member States and then monitors Member State delivery. And they can make recommendations to Member States with the possibility of sanctions, but only in the macroeconomic and fiscal area. There's definitely been some increasing focus on social objectives, and we will talk about that. But the main priority is clearly still macroeconomic and fiscal. So the first part, stability and growth. it's clear that these aims are macroeconomic and fiscal control. And the main highlights are that the deficit should not exceed 3% of GDP and that public debt shouldn't exceed 60%. So we're really talking about sustainability of public finances. It actually has a preventative and a corrective arm, which means that they are trying to prevent member states getting into problems of debt and then with the possibility then of correcting them or with sanctions. The national budgets for countries in the Eurozone have to actually be presented to the Commission in the middle of October every year to ensure that they are really following these guidelines. And there's also an imbalances procedure, which is based on a scoreboard of macroeconomic indicators, but this also includes some social indicators. And this has triggers if indicators aren't met. Europe 2020 is the strategy that EAPN was very much fought for and focuses on. And the semester is the main tool through which this is actually delivered. Now, this was the strategy for 2010 to 2020, and its aim is to promote smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. It has 5 headline targets. So we have an employment rate target, you have an R&D target, that's research and development target. You have a greenhouse gas emissions target, you can see here, and you also have an early school leavers target and a target for accessing tertiary education. And for EAPN, the most important one, which is to reduce the number of Europeans living in or at risk of poverty and social exclusion. And this is done by an aggregate of three indicators: at risk of poverty, severe material deprivation, and low work intensity. So this thematic strategy is delivered through the semester and has potential for recommendations, but also support from EU funds. Since 2017, the European Pillar of Social Rights is also mainstreamed through the semester. And this we're talking about is this EU framework of principles, 20 principles, but these are not obligatory rights, which was adopted by an interinstitutional proclamation in November 2017. Apart from the principles, this is reflected in a social scoreboard of 14 indicators, which I will show you, but it's also got legislative and non-legislative initiatives, for example, around the access to social protection and work-life balance. So since 2018, the semester has actually incorporated this social scoreboard together with the Europe 2020 poverty targets, including the poverty target, into its monitoring frame. But at the moment, the principles, all the principles aren't clearly there. Thanks. So I'm just going to flag up to you. I'm not going to go through of you, but as a reference point. So here you can see the 20 principles. And they're in 3 different areas: equal opportunities and access to the labour market, fair working conditions, and most importantly for us, social protection and social inclusion. So for example, principle 14 is minimum income, and principle 12 is social protection. But when you come to look at the social scoreboard, next one. On before, that's it, yeah. You will see that although we have the same 3 titles, the actual indicators, it's quite hard to see how they connect to the principles. So at the moment, they're a little bit of a parallel monitoring mechanism. However, for us as EAPN, the social scoreboard is very important because it has at risk of poverty and social exclusion in there, which is the at risk, which is monitoring what's happening to poverty, as well as to income inequality and other very important areas like net earnings of single workers, looking at wage poverty. So we very much support the social scoreboard as well as the principles because it does give a very clear focus on poverty. Okay. So what is the process? The process is really an annual cycle. And EAPN, with its members, follows this cycle right the way through the year. And we do this through the EU ISG group, our EU Inclusion Strategies group, and we try to make sure that members really understand the process and really help each other to engage with it by both information but also by mutual exchange. So what is the cycle? We start off now in mid-November, although this year, because the Commission is delayed in starting, it'll be coming out in mid-December. We hope that Stefan will tell us what the date is going to be. And this is really the report that launches the priorities for the year, together with a joint employment report, draft joint employment report, which gives a monitoring frame to what's been happening, how much of all the things been progressing on Europe 2020, on the pillar of social rights, on the macroeconomic priorities. Then in mid-February, the Commission comes out with country reports, and these reports assess what each country, member state, is doing to deliver on the recommendations and to deliver on these key priorities, including on poverty and including on the pillar of social rights. We also have a new Annex D, which looks at how much countries are using EU funds, structural funds, to support these recommendations. So they are looking specifically at the social rights area. Then in April, member states have their turn, and they produce national reform programs, which really set out how they are delivering on the priorities, how they're following up on the recommendations. In May, then the Commission comes back and produces country-specific recommendations. You'll have heard us talk about this, CSRs. And these are recommendations that are made to each member state, really pointing out where their weaknesses are in terms of the priorities and giving very specific recommendations, not more than 3 usually, which they are meant to follow up in the following year. Then in June and July, the Council, the member states all endorse the CSRs. There may be some small changes, and you have a final version. After that, it's really down to the member states. And there's a national process when member states are supposed to put into practice the recommendations and the analysis from the country reports. For the Eurozone areas, in October, the budgets have to be presented and looked at to see that they're abiding by the macroeconomic guidelines. And then right the way through the autumn and actually through the year, you have bilateral meetings where the Commission meets with member states and increasingly stakeholders. Okay. So what have we done in the semester? Well, we really try to engage all together. So if you are starting in this process, don't be worried about it, because you will, if you're a member in the EU ISG group, will be completely supported and engaged in this work. We have a toolkit, which we've highlighted before, which not only gives you the whole process, it gives you lots of tips about how to engage, and it gives you contact lists for the Commission desk officers, for the European semester officers, and other people. What do we do? Well, basically, the national and members try, first of all, to engage with their governments. So they try to input into the national reform program and they respond to it. That's very important because it's the only really national part of the process. They also try to talk to the European semester officers. Now, these are the officers who are in the Commission representations in each country. And that, in this way, they try to provide input to the country reports. They also try to make some advice about the recommendations and get involved with the fact-finding commissions, discussions, really flagging up their knowledge. Then we have the Commission desk officers based in Brussels, and again, members try to give them input around the country reports and on the recommendations. Since we started doing the poverty watches 2 years ago, this has been a very useful source of information which members can send to all these people to give really up-to-date analysis of what's happening on poverty and what the key priorities are, as well as recommendations. Then at the EU level, we all work together to exchange and then to think about what our common messages and advocacy are. So here you have links to all the key documents. We respond to we give an input and we respond to the annual growth survey. We do the same thing with the country reports. We respond to the recommendations, the country-specific recommendations, and also to the national reform programs. And this year we did a review of the whole of the semester in 2019. And all that information comes from you. It's basically the work that we do with you through the policy group, the EU ISG, where you bring to that group your learning, your analysis, your evidence, and exchange with other members. And then we all support each other to do the action at national and EU level. So what progress has there been? Well, basically, there's been, what we really see that we've got also economic and social coordination now. Before it was very much economic. So we see that the AGS has got much greater priority now to looking at distribution, at income inequality, and at poverty. We do see that the social scoreboard, the pillar of social rights and poverty, is monitored much more consistently, and we have got an increase in the number of social recommendations. In terms of the progress, there was obviously not progress on poverty. It went up to 123 million in 2013, but since then we have seen a small decline down to 109 million, but it's still obviously nowhere near approaching the poverty target. And we also have, very importantly, a new legal base, which really underlines the importance of civil society as a partner in this process in the European semester. But we do have some concerns, because although there's been a stronger social rhetoric, we're not really seeing the mainstreaming of all these principles of the social pillar of social rights beyond the scoreboard. For most of our members, stability and growth still seems to be the dominant approach, and there's quite a lot of worries about consistency in the recommendations when countries are supposed to be reducing deficits and debt at the same time as they're being advised to invest in social rights. So this lack of consistency or coherence is really problematic, I think, particularly in the area of minimum income, social protection, affordable housing, health and social services. We think that the social scoreboard is very important, but we're not seeing enough impact. For example, when the scoreboard indicators do badly, we don't really see strong policy action coming from the member states, or really pressure from the Commission in all those areas. And we also feel that civil society is really still not being treated as an equal partner. Although there have been great steps forward at the European level, we're not really seeing that at national level in enough member states. Okay. So I'm not going, because we're going a bit short of time, I'm just going to flag these up. This comes from our report that we did together on the review of the semester 2019. And you can see that obviously members still feel that 95% believe that the semester is still primarily macroeconomic and financial. But they do feel there's more focus on social investment in services, 50%. They feel that the pillar of social rights is somewhat more present, somewhat stronger focus on poverty reduction. All that is positive. And 45% of EAPN members are actually engaging in the semester, which is very important. Next one. In terms of participation, only 31% feel they've been consulted by the national government, and even less feel their inputs taken on board. So that's really a big concern. But if you look altogether, the engagement with the semester officer is probably the most positive one. 72% say that they've actually managed to connect and engage. So that's really a very high percentage. And overall, over 80% say that it's worth it. It's a lot. It may be a lot of work, but actually the benefits from engaging are pretty high. It's kind of worth doing. So 80% felt that. Okay. But the trouble is, in the end of the day, we want to see what progress we have on poverty, and we still have 109 million people at poverty. So in my final couple of minutes, I'm just going to flag up our main messages. So we still feel that the semester is not really focusing on an economy for people. We want to see much clearer focuses on improving living standards, reducing poverty and inequality, not just on growth. We want to see a transition to a long-term post-2020 strategy, and we want to see a better balance with rebalancing economic, social and environmental objectives, particularly with the SDGs. We want to see all the social rights being mainstreamed, so not just the scoreboard, and it really should have a separate equal section in the country reports. The continued focus on the poverty target is crucial, but it must be more ambitious and in line with the SDGs. And we also want to see that all countries receive a social CSR as a first priority, and one that really helps to deliver on the poverty target and on the pillar of social rights. In terms of specifics, there's very clear messages from our members. One first priority is quality jobs. We have to be talking about not just more employment, but quality jobs with living wages, with person-centered support. employment alone won't reduce poverty with rising in-work poverty. So we do need a rights-based integrated poverty strategy that's based on active inclusion, that's access to minimum income, social protection systems, access to quality services and quality jobs. We need more social investment in affordable and essential services and in welfare states. And adequate minimum income and social protection has to be a key priority if we're going to move forward on any kind of sustainable development. This has to be financed, obviously, and we need to see greater spending on social protection systems, but financed through more progressive and effective taxation systems. And finally, civil society organizations and people experiencing poverty do need to be in as part of the semester on a much more equal basis. And we're wanting to get really effective partnerships on equal terms with NGOs at all stages, including people experiencing poverty. So finally, why engage? It is the main Euro coordination instrument, and it will in future be crucial in trying to implement the strategy with the new Commission, particularly on the rebalancing macroeconomic, social and environmental policies. It's got a very direct link to EU funds, and this will be strengthened, as we can see in the new Annex D. It is a really strong way, people say, to help to increase your profile as EAPN networks and as civil society organizations. Because you're engaged in the EU process, you get a lot of information and it gives quite a high profile. And it's important that we're trying to work together. And the semester allows us a method to work together to try and shape EU and national policy, but with the aim to reduce poverty and to increase social rights. We also think it's very important that NGOs give input, but we're not only there to provide information, we're also there to hold governments and the EU to account. And I think that's a crucial role that NGOs, EAPN has as key civil society actors. And finally, we really have worked very hard to get progress on civil dialogue and have managed to get changes in the legal base. But we do need to have more impact. We get more impact by more people joining, us working more effectively together and really getting some results.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sian, a lot for your comprehensive and very clearly structured input on the process, on key moments to engage on our EAPN's main requests and priorities. I would allow for some questions if you have so please, if you have now immediate questions, you show please your hand and then I would give you the floor. Otherwise, you can obviously also ask after my leading over to Stefan. You can still consider a little bit what Sian said. Most points are anyway included in the toolkit we will shortly talk about, and in our publication of September 2019 is the 2019 European Semester More Social. Also, the slides Sian showed on your participation and your evaluation of the participation in your country. I don't see any hand for the time being, so it seems to be even very clear. So thanks a lot, Sian, for the moment. You obviously have the floor later. And colleagues, allow me now, if I look to the agenda, we are very much on time, that we thought when we invited to the webinar that we would already see perhaps the annual growth survey and the joint employment report that normally are published end of November. But you also know that the European Commission the new Commission started yesterday. And as already Sian has said, and we hope when I give the floor immediately to Stefan, that he can enlighten us a little bit on this. We have heard recently that the timeline is at least that the annual growth survey and the joint employment report would be published on the 11th of December, which is next Wednesday, perhaps even a little more delayed, so we wait for Stefan. What we have heard, colleagues, also as updates in the hearings of the commissioners, especially of Nicola Schmidt, responsible for jobs and now also social rights, and Dombrovskis, who is responsible for an economy that works for the people. They have both announced that the Commission would work towards an action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights in a way involving social partners and civil society in member states, a longer process over several months. So if you also have more updates on this already now, Stefan, I would invite you to come to this. Also, we have heard here, also I think in recent discussions on the semester, that in the hearings it was said that there is an intention to integrate the sustainable development goals. There is goal number 1 on eradication and reduction of poverty, but also many others that are important for us into the European semester process, but it's not yet clear how and when this should be done. And also probably not for this round, but for the next round in 2021, there should be an update on the social scoreboard on some indicators. But again, Stefan, if you have any more information on this, I would kindly invite you to share this with us. And before I give you the floor, dear colleagues, you know we have this on our webpage. You are invited to use this. We have here this document that, where I said, is also one intention, one aim of today's webinar, that we not only present it very shortly to you, but that we also collect from you and then later from other members still any relevant feedback, how we can perhaps improve it, because we want to make an update for this in early 2020. So this is the document, and you see, as a little bit as Sean did it, it also explains what is the Europe 2020 strategy that we ask now to be continued into Europe 2020 strategy as the overarching strategy. What is the European semester? It talks about the pillar of social rights, so more or less slides Sean showed, but then also goes into the key instruments and explains what is in the country reports, in the national reform programs, in the country-specific recommendations, when they are issued, and more importantly also in the timeline that is included in the publication here, also in a table. When are the appropriate moments for the EAPN national members to engage, to send in information, to seek for meetings, to reach out to European semester officer, and so on and so on. And more importantly also, this document includes the contacts to the extent we have them, we know them, of the semester officers, of the country officers, of the social protection committee. This is all included in this toolkit, and as we try to do today, also some good practice examples from our members. So that is what I wanted to flag up and to lead over now to Stefan Wiskowski, who is here not far from me in another room, about 5 meters away. So Stefan, I would unmute you and mute me, and then unmute you, and I would kindly ask you to come in, talk a little bit about the recent updates that you have, and how you see how the civil society organizations, in particular EAPN members, obviously can get better involved and have more impact, how we can also structure better the civil society involvement in the civil dialogue around the European semester. So the floor is yours, and then we do another round of questions. So if you have those, you can already, during his presentation, flag up your interest, and then I give you the floor.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay, good. So thank you for the invite. Indeed, I'm at EAPN Europe office, but also physically the office of the DG Employment is quite close to the offices of EAPN Europe. So it is 5 minutes walk, and we are in very frequent contact. So which I think is a good sign for the social aspects of the semester. Okay, yeah. Now we can start with the presentation. Many of the things have already been said by Sean in the previous presentation, but I will quickly go through the slides I have prepared, also to point to some perhaps details or nuances which might be important. So starting with the state of play, where we what is how much space and where in what aspects of the semester the poverty and social inclusion is present. So above all in the social section of the country report. So each country report, 28 until this year and perhaps also 28 in the future, we don't know, at 27. In any case, in every country report, there is a subsection in the part on employment and social issues, which deals with social situation in a member state. This is to a large extent about showing statistics and comparing the country to other member states, but it is also about describing shortly the policies and assessing whether those policies are efficient in promoting social inclusion and eradicating poverty. And if need be, there is also a focus on particular groups which are at special risk and should be given more attention. So this is, and country reports are so-called staff working documents. So this is something over which we, as Commission officials, have control. We basically, formally, they're supposed to be a kind of our notes for policy recommendations. But in any case, so this is basically Commission product to which we invite contributions, but we are basically quite relatively free to shape the country reports. Then there are indicators, and those appear in the social scoreboard, which you are already familiar with, and in the joint assessment framework. There are the asterisks, meaning that on the next slide you're going to see more in detail what those indicators are about. Those indicators are important because they're a kind of shared ownership. If country reports are owned by the Commission services, then the indicators in social scoreboard and in the assessment framework are joint ownership of Commission and the member states government. So this is very important that the member states have subscribed to those issues being analyzed and reported in the semester process. And then there are country-specific recommendations, which are mostly the ownership of the Council. So the governments of the member states acting jointly. And the country-specific recommendations are a product of political compromise, and they also show what the member states recommend to each other. Over this, well, obviously, Commission influences them because the first draft comes from the Commission. But over this, there is the ownership is even more shared than over other aspects of the semester. So I think this is, it's good for. I think it might be useful for the civil society to be aware of the different status of ownership and stakes in those three elements of the semester which are relevant for the poverty and social inclusion issues. Now, if we can move to the next slide, you're going to now you can see the social scoreboard indicators. And you have seen already a full list of indicators on in the presentation before this one. Here you also can see the so-called secondary indicators, which are also important because they give some idea about how social inclusion and poverty eradication issues are approached in the semester analysis. So we have, we look at risk of poverty or social exclusion as the main issue, but also under this, we look more in detail on what is the risk of poverty, so financial poverty, what is the gravity of material deprivation, again with asterisk, because in the next slide you're going to see how this is changing in over several semester cycles. We look about low work intensity, about housing deprivation, separately for owners and tenants. And we also look at the long-term unemployment rate. We look at in-work poverty as a secondary indicator, and the impact of social transfers, and on medical aspects. So self-reported unmet need for medical care, and out-of-pocket expenditure on healthcare. So some of those indicators are stronger because they come from administrative data. Some of them are weaker because it's only based on surveys. But in any case, the indicators which we use, also the secondary indicators which we use in the social scoreboard, reflect the main points of interest, the approach to analysis. Now, interesting aspect, we are moving from the severe material deprivation to indicators to material and social deprivation. So both are reported in parallel for several cycles, basically reflecting the changes in society and the technical progress. So in the last years, affording a washing machine, color TV, or telephone became, those items became so accessible in Europe that being deprived of getting them is no longer a sign of material deprivation. Whereas it made sense to include several items of social inclusion to the indicator. So in order to maintain consistency over years, the old indicator is slowly phased out, and the new is slowly phased in. But I think it is a good development to see that we are, as the potential of European societies is getting greater, then also the level of ambition is getting greater, and that we consider that having regular leisure activities or being able to spend a small amount of money each week on themselves is an important aspect of being socially included. Next slide, please. Now, then another list to some extent with the list in the social scoreboard. Those are the this comes from joint assessment framework on 2 policy areas on preventing poverty and social exclusion. And the next slide will be on tackling poverty in the working age. I'm not going to read all the indicators because time is limited, and there are more practical issues to be tackled on the next slides. But just for sake of keeping it in order, I think this is also shows you how at what aspects of poverty we are more likely to look. Okay, next slide. Now, on this, perhaps I'm going to disappoint you a bit. This morning, I asked colleagues in Secretariat General of the Commission whether we have a set date for the publication of the autumn package, and whether this date can be shared with external world, and the answer was no. So it's for sure it's it is not mid-November anymore. I also doubt that it's going to be 11th of December, but the autumn package has a name for a reason, and autumn lasts until 21st of December. So an informed guess would be that still before Christmas, finally it will be published, and you will be able to read it over Christmas break. the documents which form the package. This will be, as usually, an overview of the economic situation in the EU. It has been called for several years annual growth survey. I didn't put this name on purpose in this presentation because the name might be changed, but the content and the character of the document will stay. There will be, as usually, Euro area recommendation. Then there will be, and this is the most important, I guess, for the participants of this webinar, the Commission proposal for the joint employment report, which, among other things, presents the social scoreboard. Then, in last week of February, you can expect the country reports. We are busy working on them right now. Most of the analysis has already been done, but still many things need to be either updated or checked. This will happen over the next weeks, so that by last week of February, we'll have final versions. Then national reform programs are due by the end of April. We can hope that some of them will be in already in mid-April, but let's we never can be sure which arrive sooner and which member states are going to share them early on. This is important for the stakeholders, for civil society, to be prepared to react in pretty short time span between the publication of the reform programs and the moment when the discussions on country-specific recommendations start. Those discussions will take probably place in June. In the committees in Brussels, based on the proposals coming from the Commission. But again, in the end, the country-specific recommendations are adopted by the Council. And quite often we have seen it. There are significant changes to how they are phrased. And then immediately after we are done with the country-specific recommendations for 2020, we start brainstorming on the next round of the report. And after the summer break, we start drafting those reports. Okay, now how you can get involved. So please, once they're out, read and comment on the country reports and also on the national reform programs. This feedback will be important for the next round, because the cyclical character of the semester implies that an important aspect of a report is the assessment of progress on country-specific recommendations from the past year. Also, the draft country-specific recommendations, those which come from the Council, are therefore getting feedback and reactions and comments from civil society. Please bear in mind that quite often we, when proposing the new recommendations, we want to keep them relatively stable compared to previous years, so that we can trace policy answers and developments in quite well-defined area. This is because we are aware of the fact that it's not very realistic to expect problems described in the reports and recommended to be addressed in country-specific recommendations to be addressed within 1 year or even less than a year after the recommendations are out. And then another form of involvement is contributing to the next, so already 2021 round of the country reports, by monitoring progress on the recommendations of 2019 and 2020, and sharing new findings analysis. I understand that the Poverty Watch Sean has mentioned is something which we could be very much interested in learning when working on the next round of the report. Then formats of involvement, and here I think it's useful to look at the EU level and the member states level. At the EU level, with EU NGOs, EU stakeholders, we after every semester milestone, so autumn package, publication of draft country-specific recommendations, and between the two publication of the country reports, we hold strategic dialogues with representatives of civil society. The nearest one will happen probably at some point in January. So after the draft joint employment report and other parts of the package are out. So after you have time to read them, digest, and comment, we would hold it still in January. Then after the next one would be at some point in March after the publication of country reports, and so on and so on. So at least 3 times a year we have this kind of event. Then the other semester-related events at the national level are seminars organized by the European Economic and Social Committee. This is yet another ownership, so we are aware that they take place, and sometimes our colleagues in Commission representations are invited to take floor during those events, but it's not organized by the Commission per se. But it is a very good venue for discussion between civil society and coordination and actions on European semester. We are being kept in the loop by colleagues from the Economic and Social Committee. I hope that also you are kept in the loop and invited to those events. So far, they took place in 12 member states. I'm afraid I cannot recall a complete list of the member states where it took place, but this is like a big annual event on the semester. Then very important aspects are meetings during fact-finding missions. I think that we have just finalized the round of fact-finding or fact-checking, because depending on whether the mission took place in early October or late November, it was about finding facts for the next round of country reports, or about checking whether we got the facts right if it was later on in the calendar. But we have asked colleagues in representations who are responsible for preparing the agendas of those study trips to include meetings with civil society, and I hope that at least some of you were included in those meetings. And then once a year we try to bring together the civil society from both national and European level. This is recently we had this event in late October, focusing on the role of civil society itself. So perhaps it was not so much about the semester, but the rationale behind that was that the same way as we not only involve social partners in the semester process, but we also report on the state of social dialogue in the country reports. We have similar intention for civil society. So we want to learn about what we can reasonably expect across union, because the situation of civil society varies a lot. And it might be useful to encourage some member states to invest more in relations and in support for civil society. So this is one of the aspects of which we wanted to learn about recently. But having done this once, next time we are going to be focused more on the semester. How exactly this is going to be done is still to be seen, but we count on cooperation with the EU stakeholders, EAPN among them, to find out. And then something which is very vague, tailored formats, but it basically means that we have good working contacts, and if you feel a need or an opportunity to work with us, to let us know about some developments, or to get us involved, then please reach out. It's very good news that the cooperation with European semester officers in the Commission representations was assessed as good by more than 70% of respondents to your survey. So they are the natural point of contact at the national level. But also the desk officers in Brussels working on social issues are accessible, and another EU stakeholder, Eurochild, has done a remarkable work at sending them during the semester analysis for the country reports short reports or reviews of the situation for many member states. So this is also like something to be considered to contribute to the analysis. Obviously, you can channel it through the semester officers, but perhaps delivering it straight to people who actually draft the reports and guide the analysis is also a good idea. And then there is always the office of EAPN in Brussels. Really, I repeat, quite close to our offices, and we are in good contact. So also, if you want, I believe you can use this as a channel for communication with the Commission. And last but not least, we quite often are quite busy, but sometimes we are less busy, and then we might be able to talk in more detail about the semester at your events, also at the national level. So if you think it might be useful and interesting for your members, then we in principle would be happy to do that. Okay, that's it. I was a little bit too long, but I hope I didn't bore you.
So thank you, Stefan, for giving us, at least at the end, also a rather detailed overview of the different channels, the points in time, and the formats of involvement. I think that was very useful, and I'm happy to say that in our toolkit we have covered the issues that you raised in the same way. And also thank you for giving us your little bit different touch and overview on the process of the European semester, key documents, reference documents, and all the other issues. And then we have to wait for the final updates on the content of the semester. I have not seen for the time being now any hand shown, which also again seems to indicate to me that neither is it boring, but rather interesting what Can and Stefan have said, but also that it has been clearly structured, also thanks to the support you gave. So if you allow, then I would now give the floor to our own members, and that they share, that we start a little bit now this internal exchange of experiences and good or perhaps also bad practices. And I would invite first Paul and then Judith and then Richard to speak. So Paul, I give you the floor, and I hope you will be able to be listened by everybody, and I immediately go to your slide set. So please, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, I'll be very brief. I just have really one slide, so I've tried to summarize everything there. So just in relation to European Anti-Poverty Network Ireland, I suppose we have our own direct engagement as our own network as EAPN, but also we have other engagement which we do collectively through what's called the European Semester Alliance. So I'll just deal with them slightly separately, but obviously they're very connected. So just as the European Anti-Poverty Network, we've always engaged with the National Reform Programme since it started. So we have an opportunity from the government to make a submission. And then most years, but not every year, we get a draft, and then we're able to comment on the draft. So sometimes that draft only comes out with a few days' notice. So it's improved in the last year or two, but sometimes it's almost impossible really to have any kind of a real feeling that you're actually contributing in a real way. The other thing is that in the last number of years, what the government has started doing for the published national reform programmes, sometimes we see maybe where possibly we maybe have an influence. Sometimes it's not so obvious. But what it started to do in the last 3 or 4 years is to publish all submissions on the website with the national reform programme itself. And the last 2 years have also been taking key points, so at least we know we're reading them. They've taken key points from different submissions and they've included them as an appendix in the national reform programme itself. So to take out key points and key recommendations from the various submissions and do them. And then that's kind of our engagement at a governmental level. And also as EAPN, separately this year for the first time, we've met with the Commission fact-finding team about a month ago, just directly as the EAPN with the DG Employment and Social Affairs, just to tease out some of the particular issues that were important to us in relation to the semester process. So then separately, we also engage collectively then as what we convene or we coordinated called the European Semester Alliance. So this was an alliance which started in 2014, when at the time the Commission decided to fund an alliance at a European level, a semester alliance, which EAPN coordinated at the European level at the time. And as part of that, different national alliances, could be 3 national alliances could be set up on a pilot basis. And we were one of those, and Denmark and Bulgaria were the other 2. So even though the Commission's support for that alliance only lasts for 1 year, we've continued to operate here in that alliance. So it's like I coordinate that, and we coordinate that from EAPN. But it's very clear from the other organisations, the other 11 organisations, that there's collective responsibility around it. While we coordinated, they're responsible for inputting to it as well. So they include social and equality organisations. There's an environmental network are part of it, and one of the larger trade unions as well, SIP2, are members of the alliance. So in terms of what we do, the first year we had more resources, we were able to have more intensive engagement. But now what we do is we make a written response to the country report to Ireland, a detailed response based on the expertise of the members of the alliance. We also use that response to input to the national reform programme. Within our response, we include recommendations for the national reform programme and for country-specific recommendations as well. We also use that as the basis for ongoing meetings with the Commission. So every year we have a good relationship with our semester officer. We get invited in after we publish our response to meet with the semester officer and sometimes other staff within the Commission office here. And also we use it as a basis for meeting with the fact-finding team every year. We've met with them, I think, for the last 6 or 7 years. when they've come to Ireland, we've been able to meet with them directly. And also we've been invited to speak or to participate in Commission organised events here related to the semester, but also related to other European developments. So that's in terms of our broader engagement. And then kind of just very briefly in terms of our impact, that overall we have a reasonably good relationship with the European Commission through the semester officer and the broader Commission staff. And that's been useful in terms of being able to feel that we're having some sort of an impact on the country report and on how it's been perceived, and feeling we're taken reasonably seriously in terms of our contributions. But at national level, it's not as clear that we have the same impact, for example, on the national reform programme as we do on the country report. But we also see, I say, as EAPN, that our engagement at the semester at national level is also part of our wider advocacy on policy in terms of how it impacts on poverty and social exclusion. So it's part of our ongoing engagement in other areas. So for us, that's important. So hopefully that's sufficient in terms of giving an overview in terms of how we structure our engagement, but also in terms of where we see we have most impact.
Thank you for the time being. Thank you for the time being. Very helpful, and also showing your engagement at EAPN Ireland, long-standing and rather comprehensive, but also in a broader alliance, and talking a little bit about the impact. And you mentioned this, and also Stefan talked about the fact-finding team, and I just saw a short question via our chat from Judith here in our office that asked, I did not hear that much about the fact-finding team. Can someone give some more information? So before I give you the floor back, and then to Judith and to Richard, can you say something about this? Do you have experience with the fact-finding missions and the influence more on this from Ireland?
Yeah, the fact-finding team, they come about a month ago, came to Ireland. So they involve representatives from quite a range of DGs in the Commission who are all responsible for looking at different elements of the country report. So they meet with different stakeholders over a period of maybe 2 days. And each year, for the last number of years, we've been allocated a time, maybe an hour or an hour and a half, to meet with the fact-finding team. So we come prepared, we make a short presentation on different issues, and then we engage in kind of questions and answers from the fact-finding team. It's coordinated by the overall secretariat part of the Commission, and the semester officer in Ireland coordinates kind of the timetable for the meetings. So we've been part of that for a number of years, as I said. We also get a good sense from the feedback we get from them of what maybe the priorities are. And they're obviously asking and curious about certain areas of policy. So we get a sense from them then what the priority might be for the country report, and also maybe, I suppose, in some ways for the CSRs.
Thank you. I think that is useful indeed. You already mentioned the fact-finding team and the missions and how you can prepare. So I don't see any other hands for the time being, but Judith, can you take over now and talk us a little bit through your experience of the Belgian network, and then I will come back to possibly other questions, but I still don't see anybody raising their hand. So I go for the time being to Belgium. Judith, you have the floor.
Hello. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Super. So I will tell you a little bit more about how we from the Belgium Anti-Poverty Network are engaged with the European semester. So to start off with, I thought it was important to say that for us, our priority is in the first place, to work closely together within the European Anti-Poverty Network with a policy group, namely the EU ISG. So we analyze the country report, the national reform program, and we share this all together within the EU ISG. And then after EAPN staff team, they take all together the feedback of all the national members, and they draft these very high quality assessments. And we really like to work within this EU ISG process. It's very fruitful, and we think this is a very nice way, because we also feel that the staff team after really does a great work to advocate with these documents to try to make the European the European semester more social, and Europe in the long run also more social. The two reports that we mainly focus on within the Belgium Anti-Poverty Network in the first place is the country report and the national reform program. Regarding the country report, why is this so interesting for us? Well, as already was mentioned here, the Commission really describes the economic, institutional and social situation of every member state. And it tells also how each country is performing regarding its European engagements, such as European 2020 strategy, the European Pillar of Social Rights. And for example, in Belgium, we read in the country report that the Commission said that there is a lack of social housing and healthcare was not accessible for people with a low income. So every time when we advocate for these things at national level, we will always make use of the country report and say, like, look, this is not only us as an anti-poverty network saying this, but also the Commission is saying this. So this can really reinforce our work. So it's a very important document, and this is also why it's very important for us to influence this document directly. And we do so by trying to have a good relationship with our desk officer, to meet him from time to time. And we did this for the first time last year when we developed our Poverty Watch. So we shared this with him, and we talked about it, what were the main concerns we had regarding poverty in Belgium. And as Sean said, like, some countries were really successful regarding their contact with their desk officer. And also us, we saw that our social housing concern was taken up in the report of last year. Of course, we never know if this was a coincidence or not, but it really motivated us to build further on this relationship or on this contact with the desk officer. And so this year again, we did not make a poverty watch, but we sent them our feedback on the country report that we wrote down for the EAPN report. And we had a meeting with them to talk about this in October. And it was really a good meeting. We had the feeling it was an open conversation. We told them what we liked in the report of last year and what we really thought that they needed to keep. We also thought what we thought was missing and where they could put more attention to. They were also very open to ask us questions. They asked our opinion on certain issues. We saw them writing down things, so we are quite confident that some of our recommendations will be found in the report for next year. Maybe just something to keep in mind. The first time that we met with them, we really stressed out, as we always do, that we are representing people experiencing poverty, and that we represent their recommendations, their stories. And it was a little bit hard to convince them of the importance of this knowledge by experience. I think, of course, they were not blind for that it's really important, but they really made clear that for them they really need quantitative research results to include in the country report. And so what we did this year is that when we went to talk with them and we showed them what people experiencing poverty thought or what were their problems, we also tried to find European research studies to back up the stories of people experiencing poverty. So this can be maybe a tip. Regarding the National Reform Programme, Paul was explained us that in Ireland they are really involved with drafting this or with feedback, giving feedback or in relationship with their government. In Belgium, this is a little bit different. We always receive the message that the National Reform Programme is really more like it sums up all the actions that Belgium undertook in recent years to tackle poverty, for example. And so there is nothing new. It's really something that has already been done in the past. It's kind of a rapportage. They just report on what they have been done. So it's not, there is no strategy, or they don't say how they will attack poverty in the future. So we were never that much involved, but on the other hand, what we saw was that other organizations in Belgium, like the National Council for People with a Handicap, they were able to write a kind of shadow report. I think that Paul is also doing this in Ireland. And it was then published as an appendix in the National Reform Programme. And so we decided that we could have a go with it. And also as a poverty organization, we could write such a report. And so we are doing this for actually right now. We are trying to find alliances with other organizations, and we will do it within the Belgium platform. This Belgium platform is a platform organized by the Belgium administration, and it fosters the dialogue between people experiencing poverty, civil society, cabinet, scientists, other administrations, and we talk in every 3 months in this platform on social issues, and we also follow up the progress that Belgium is making concerning the European 2020 strategy. So together with the Belgium administration, we are now preparing this conference where all the members of the platform will be invited, but also it's open for also others. And on that day, we will really work together with everybody that is present at this conference to write a mutual letter, the shadow report, and then we will try to publish it in the National Reform Programme. And I think it was a good idea to also send this report to our desk officer after, so we can also get some feedback from him. This is a little bit in a nutshell, but if you still have questions, don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you, well, merci. Thank you, Judith. I think it was more than in a nutshell. Also, thanks for referring, as already Stefan, to the Poverty Watch and the use you can make, and I think also more importantly now to the different channels you use and your comprehensive coverage of the different fora and different products you do with shadow reports or even organizing conferences, and then also I think a very important point that you raised now, how to bring in qualitative experiences and the voices of people living with poverty, and convincing the administration and others at European level that this is also an important input and not only quantitative data, and as important as they are. So I think that's useful. Judith, yourself, you ask to the group. We are now still 20, so I think it's good, good turnout. If there are any questions, I don't see any hands, so we are a little bit also behind our time schedule. So I hope, dear colleagues, you have kept your interest and questions up to the end, and I would then give the floor now. We travel from west to the center and now to more central Eastern Europe, to Warsaw. I would give the floor now to Richard Scharfenberg and ask you, please, Richard, to come in with your experiences that you structured under 8 points. I give you the floor and I show the slide set if you indicate me. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. My perspective will be long-term, and I tried to summarize all my knowledge about our engagement in European semester in Poland in 8 points, 8 lessons. First lesson is about institutional framework for participation. I consider it as a very important precondition for our engagement. And in Poland, government decided to make a formal task force responsible for Europe 2020 implementation, and that was enacted by Prime Minister Executive Order. So first precondition, having that institutional framework, was met in Poland. Of course, second precondition is that we should have our representative in that task force formally implemented by Prime Minister, and we managed to have our representative in that task force. Of course, that representative should have some qualities, for example, and that is third point, for example, expertise, because European semester and European Europe 2020 strategy, they are somehow complex, and representative should understand all that complexity. And we also managed representative because he is an academic and with extensive expertise in European Polish social policy. Of course, there are other preconditions, for example, having clear strategy with concrete goals, what we should accomplish by our engagement in that task force. And we had several goals. One of them was to make Polish Europe 2020 anti-poverty target more ambitious, because in 2013 we saw that it was accomplished. So it was very early, and our idea was that we should impose a pressure on government to update that goal. Please, next slide. And of course, our proposals should be that the proposals related to the updating of target. We proposed to update it twice as more, from 1.5 million to 3 million. And that was, of course, concrete, and government, the board of that task force was ready to discuss it with us. Of course, other concrete proposals, this is very good venue with those poverty watch, because now we present our poverty watch in that task force, in that forum, and we could discuss about the concrete proposals we included in poverty watch with the task force members. Of course, we should have convincing argumentation for our points and proposals, and of course, we have, for example, that issue with updating the target. Our argument was very strong, because if Poland was so good at achieving that target, so why not updating it and changing it to the more ambitious target? And of course, if we base our proposals, concrete proposals, on the facts and some research, it is much more convincing than basing it only on some ideology or only the people experiencing poverty and their experiences. Of course, what is also important, and this is seventh lesson, coalitions with other stakeholders, because that task force established in 2012 has a broad membership. There are trade unions representatives, employers organizations representatives, other NGOs, and we collaborated at some points with trade unions, for example, and employers organizations, because for them in-work poverty was very interesting, and they were engaged in that discussions. And with other NGOs, for example, poverty and disability, because in Poland we have very strong movement of those NGOs representing people with disabilities, and they, of course, are interested in the issue of poverty and disability. And the last point, eighth lesson, of course, quality of that participatory process is very important. And from 2012, we have some years to discuss about the process, and I feel that after 2014, it improved very much. So we have regular meetings in that task force. We have a yearly working meeting on poverty. We can present Poverty Watch on that meeting. So we have detailed responses to our proposals. So I feel that also minimum quality of the participation was accomplished. And that is all about our lessons from Polish case. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot also to you. And I think we have now 3 cases with very practical guidance and experiences on what you did, and also about the impact that you could achieve, so that it's worthwhile to engage, that there is a sort of increasing quality also due to the more continued engagement and preparing qualitative high information that is also backed up by the experiences of those experiencing poverty, working in coalitions, was mentioned in all cases. So I would say that's all very interesting and helpful. And we are now formally at the moment where we can close the webinar, but we have no formal deadline, so we can continue still for 5 minutes. The system will continue working. If you still now have everybody in the call, in the webinar, if somebody still has a question, you can either show the hand or unmute you and then talk, and then see that you tell us to whom you have the question of the 5 speakers. I already thank a lot for their effort and commitment for having prepared the interventions. They're rich interventions, and as I said in the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, is being recorded, and it can be listened to afterwards. We will obviously share with all members of the EU-ISG group afterwards how they can access the webinar and the related presentations, so that the learning and the exchange continues. Would there anybody have a question to one of the speakers? Obviously, the one speaker to another speaker, that is also allowed. Sean, you have a question. I give you the floor later.
Yeah. Yes, thanks very much. I think it was really interesting to get the national examples, and very different examples. I know the cases quite well, but even I was quite interested to see the differences. I don't know if we still have Stefan with us, but for me what's quite interesting is the different approaches towards basically working with the Commission and working with national governments, and that does seem to be quite a core issue. And it seems to be only Poland in our examples, or Poland has the strongest example of this sort of structure, where the Europe 2020 working group, I think it's called, task force, which actually allows civil society to engage as real partners around concrete themes. And I wondered if there was other examples of that in other member states. I don't know if Stefan is there and can answer that.
Yes. Yes, I'm still here, but I'm not sure whether I can answer that. So basically, we are launching now, we have this survey of civil society from different areas, asking them how well they were involved in the process and also by the government. We got some reports by the EASO, so showing that some member states are doing it better than the others. From what I remember, there was given an example of Czech Republic as a country in which the government was really open to work with the civil society, but we don't have it structured yet. But we are going to have it structured pretty soon. And this will provide an opportunity to suggest to some member states to perhaps exchange practices on how to involve civil society efficiently and productively. But we know there is a big difference, and it changes not only between country to country, but also depending on the orientation and style of the government.
We would obviously like to support you wherever we can, Stefan, in this work to structure it. And I have been only last week in the Czech Republic. We have also Karel and Ivo in our webinar, and I can confirm that indeed our Czech EAPN network has a good relationship and open door with the semester officer, and also tries to engage with the Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor. So there is something at least developing that I can also confirm, and backed up by their own work, having updated their poverty report, and the work in our EAPN network. I think that can continue. Sean, you wanted to come in again? You wanted to react to this?
I was just
wait, I give the floor.
Sorry, I was just going to ask to Stefan whether you're going to ask civil society organisations like EAPN to contribute to that survey, because obviously the member states give you one perspective on this dialogue, but I think you might find that civil society organisations give you a slightly different perspective. We have a lot of details from a lot of member states on the quality of civil dialogue, so I just wondered if you're planning to do that as part of the survey.
The idea is that we asked the European semester officers to indicate the civil society organizations to be asked. So we are checking this with civil society, not with the government, but with civil society based on the indications of the European semester officers.
So thank you. And as I said, we have here the publication is the 2019 European Semester More Social, that we also use. Stefan, you will remember, and other colleagues at the Civil Society seminar, where we have our information, as Sean also said, summarized well on the civil society perspective of participation, certain fields, the effectiveness, and so on and so on. So we have this information, and we can obviously share and use it, as just said by Sean, and would encourage you also to include the civil society perspective in this exercise, as important and as good in most cases now the relations of our members to the European semester officers seem to be. But that would obviously welcome. Other colleagues still, we give us 2 minutes, then we close. Is there any other question from anybody to the speakers or to others? I see Ringaile. Ringaile, you have the floor. So Lithuania, please talk.
Hi, I hope that you can hear me properly. I actually have a question for Mr. Stefan, because I want to take a point that Judith from Belgium said. I'm from Lithuania, by the way, about national reform programs. And Judith mentioned that sometimes she doesn't feel that that the national networks have to interrupt somewhere, because usually it's about what was done or about results of some programs and so on. So I just wanted to ask how Commission sees that, and is it what you expect to see in national reform program? And how should the good national reform program look?
This is a very good. Can I speak? This is a very good question. Yes, it's true that the national reform programs could be better. And we would like them to be better. Unfortunately, it's quite often it is a bit formalistic, but we also hope that if there is more interest among the national stakeholders, including civil society, in formulation of the national reform programs, this will contribute to their quality and to their relevance, because basically, like it's not the same way as it is not really for the member states to comment or criticize country reports. We are not in a position to criticize the national reform programs. We can simply, well, the way to react to that is by drawing the first proposals for country-specific recommendations. But yes, it is. You're right that the national reform programs could be, in many cases, be better.
Thank you for this, and probably this is not the last exchange on this point, but also Stefan, you obviously see the concerns, but also the interest of our members, and you know about it, but it was, I think, very well now again mentioned by our Lithuanian colleague Rimgaile. So last question possibly for anybody, otherwise we would close. Is there anybody else that wants to speak? I don't see this. Yeah, then Paul, please. I give you the floor. Paul, last input, please talk.
Yeah, sorry, it's a very practical question to Stefan. Just, Stefan, on your slide when you're presenting the risk of poverty and exclusion indicator, you also included within that, apart from the three ones that are very familiar with, you included severe housing deprivation, both for the owner and tenant in that grouping of indicators or elements of AROPE. So I'm just wondering about that.
Yes, but what do you want to know?
Just that I wasn't. I just wasn't aware that there was already also included. I was familiar with the other three indicators, elements of it, but not with the severe housing deprivation being part of the AROPE overall indicator.
Well, it is not that it is a part of the AROPE indicator. So those are not ingredients of AROPE indicator. Those are secondary indicators of the social scoreboard. So, they the way it comes from is basically you have the chapters in the pillar, and also the indicators are put together by a chapter corresponding to the chapters in the pillar. But this does not mean that we take into consideration housing and deprivation when calculating the AROPE. No, it is that those indicators are like second order things we look at when looking at poverty and social exclusion in member states. And by the way, I'm not totally sure whether we have it robust for all member states right now. But in any case, it's not that those are not the ingredients of AROPE. No.
Okay.
Yes. No, it's just it was on a different slide, but it's okay. That's clear. But it was just something I saw on an earlier slide. I think it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just say something on that? Because the joint assessment framework that Stefan refers to, the JAF, one of the problems for us, Stefan, is that the JAF isn't publicly available. So you're referring to something there which is not something which is actually shared. or has this changed now? Because certainly the draft never used to be shared publicly, and I think that is a bit of a problem because it means that we don't actually know what indicators are being considered when you write the country reports.
Stefan, do you want to reply? I also now have, I think, the right slide that Paul referred to. I see it now. So, Stefan, do you have any? Could you please reply to him?
No. So this is what I already said, that those are not the elements of ROPI, and yeah, that's it. And the other thing, well, that's the way it is. So, but I hope that it shows, some, approach how we deal with it.
Okay, so I think we could still obviously continue a little bit, but certain issues have been raised, and I'm personally, first of all, happy that we managed to have 1 hour 42 minutes now without any major technical hiccup. We have tested this 3 times. We have improved from step to step, also thanks to our colleague Rebecca, who helped us with this. Thanks a lot again for your interest of staying with us, of bearing with us for this more than 1.5 hours, and I think a very rich range of presentations, both here from Sean and Stefan, whom I both thank a lot, but also obviously Paul, Judith, and Richard for their very helpful and rich and colorful sharing of their own experiences and perhaps guidance how other networks could improve their involvement and, as the 3 said, also see impact, more or less, but over the years, clearly impact of their involvement. So we keep it there, I think, for today. We close this webinar for now, and you will get the information on how we share both the recording, as I said, and the presentation soon. And so, Stefan, thanks a lot for having been here. You have also heard our issues, and we will obviously be in close cooperation and exchange, as you rightfully underlined. We are also physically speaking not far from one another, so it's easy to drop in the office, and the channel should obviously stay very open because we are now gearing up to come in the semester 2020 process with some changes. So happy to get also some updates and also our interest of having well-structured, better structured involvement of the civil society on the different channels in the member states and at European level. I keep it to this, and again, thanks for your information, for your attention, and see you soon, colleagues, and talk to you soon. Thanks, Stefan, as guest, and thanks to all the other speakers again. Have a good afternoon and the first good week of December with the new Commission. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.